Hey there, this is Ari Whitten with the Energy Blueprint, and in this video I want to tell you all about the science of stress and fatigue, stress and your energy levels, and of course, how to fix the problem. Also, little hint here, it's not just about adrenal fatigue. It's not all about the adrenals. Now, when talking about stress and fatigue, most of the discussion that's out there currently is all about the adrenal glands and this concept of adrenal fatigue. And the basic idea here is that the adrenal glands are part of our stress response system, and they produce a hormone called cortisol that is involved with helping out this stress response. And the idea is if you have prolonged stress demands, chronic stress on the body, it eventually wears out the adrenal glands. They can't produce enough cortisol to keep up with the stress demands. And as a result of that situation, you get all sorts of symptoms. So things like fatigue, obviously, but also anxiety, depression, brain fog, low blood sugar, low libido, waking up tired in the mornings even after sleeping 7 or 8 hours, cravings for sugary and salty foods, and trouble sleeping through the night, especially waking up between 2 to 4 a.m. Now, contrary to popular belief, and as I'm about to show you, your adrenal glands are only a small part of the overall story of how stress affects your health and your energy levels. It turns out that there are over a dozen physiological pathways in the body, mechanisms that can be a bridge between stress and fatigue, stress and health problems. And most of them have nothing to do with fatigued adrenal glands. It's perfectly possible for stress to cause all sorts of health problems in a person, including fatigue, without anything being wrong with one's adrenal glands or cortisol levels. Now, let's get right into the science. So what are all these things that stress does to the body other than fatigue or adrenal gland? Well, one of the big ones is disrupting and depleting our endocannabinoid system. Now, cannabinoid is kind of an interesting word, right? It sounds sort of like cannabis, which is marijuana or hemp. Now, most people are unaware of it, but we have an internal system called the endocannabinoid system that manufactures its own supplies of cannabis-like molecules. And despite the fact that very few people have ever heard of this system of the body, it's actually one of the biggest players when it comes to your mood and your energy levels. The endocannabinoid system plays a huge role in regulating our response to stress and helping us to reestablish homeostasis, to get back into balance once we're kind of in stress mode, to get out of it back into normal mode. So the endocannabinoid system is involved with energy level and alertness regulation, regulating inflammation, fighting stress, fear, pain, and anxiety, and importantly, initiating and stopping our body's stress response. Now, given those 4 functions, it's easy to see that if your endocannabinoid system isn't functioning well, you're going to have big problems. You're going to be overwhelmed with stress, anxiety, inflammation, and your energy levels are going to suffer. Now, according to breakthrough new research, the endocannabinoid system is really a big player in combating the effects of stress and anxiety and really helping us to get back into balance. And University of Washington neurologist Ethan Russo, who has done research on this, postulates that clinical endocannabinoid deficiency underlies all sorts of conditions like migraines, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome or irritable bowel disease, and a cluster of other degenerative conditions which may respond favorably to cannabinoid therapies. Now, this is kind of a map of a vicious cycle that's created when you deplete the endocannabinoid system. So, first of all, you lose the ability to turn off and to combat fear, anxiety, and stress. And so once you're already in a state of chronic stress and then you've lost the ability to turn those things off, now that depleted endocannabinoid system actually contributes to further stress, and it contributes to your body kind of staying locked in stress mode. So big problems when you have a depleted endocannabinoid system. Next, stress causes HPA axis dysfunction. So what's the HPA axis? Well, it's kind of the system that regulates the adrenal glands. And while a lot of people have focused their whole discussion around these little adrenal glands that sit on top of the kidneys, what's left out of the discussion from most people is the fact that the adrenals are actually regulated by certain parts of the brain, namely the hypothalamus and pituitary. So basically the way that the HPA axis functions during stress is that the hypothalamus secretes a hormone called CRH that stimulates the pituitary, and the pituitary stimulates its own hormone called ACTH that stimulates the adrenal glands. And it's kind of a cycle in that way. And then the adrenal glands, of course, produce cortisol. And this is a big player in our body's stress response. And cortisol is involved in triggering our physical response to stress, things like injury, lack of sleep, excessive exercise, anxiety, depression. It prepares the body to withstand these stressful triggers by stimulating production of catecholamines, which cortisol and things like adrenaline are hormones that are part of this family called catecholamines, which trigger, the famous fight or flight physiology. Now, importantly, when cortisol is produced, it immediately triggers a feedback loop that's designed to shut down further stress activation. So basically, the system's designed in a way that when it gets activated, it's also designed to feed back and kind of shut down further stimulation of the HPA axis. Now, the problem is when the system is chronically stressed, when you are chronically stressed, and also when your endocannabinoid system is depleted, you can't turn off stress very well, the HPA axis is constantly activated and starts to dysfunction. It starts to become resistant to the negative feedback loops, telling it to shut down, which causes the whole system to start to work abnormally. Now, that obviously creates a number of problems, and HPA axis dysfunction has been linked with all sorts of different conditions, like you see here: burnout, chronic fatigue syndrome, anxiety disorders, depression, insomnia, and so on. Now, it's worth mentioning here before we go on that I believe that the HPA axis system has been overplayed in importance, and I think that there's been a move by a number of practitioners away from the model of adrenal fatigue, and people are recognizing that the adrenals are not the big player here. And more people are now talking about HPA axis dysfunction. While I think that's a good move in the right direction, there is actually quite a lot of research showing that this is probably a secondary factor. It's not a primary cause of why we actually get fatigue. It usually is not even detectable. In most studies, it's not even detectable at the onset or early stages of fatigue. It only happens deep into chronic fatigue syndrome, for example. So I think that this is mainly a secondary player. So that's just a little side note. Number 3, stress depletes critical brain chemicals, which can cause anxiety, fatigue, and inability to enjoy life. So some of these are dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, and GABA. These are neurotransmitters in the brain. And some people obviously know of neurotransmitter imbalances. And we've heard this idea, especially around depression. And, the idea that by taking certain pharmaceutical drugs, we're correcting neurotransmitter imbalances and combating depression and other mood issues. Well, the interesting part that most people are unaware of is that neurotransmitter imbalances do not usually appear for no reason at all. Those neurotransmitter imbalances, what many think are the cause of many psychological issues, are themselves caused by other factors. Now, stress is a big one as far as what causes those neurotransmitter imbalances. Now, as far as serotonin and dopamine, these are important players in regulating our mood, our tension and anxiety level, our energy level, and our motivation. Now, low levels of either of these neurotransmitters can contribute to depression, anxiety, binge eating, lethargy, apathy, anhedonia, which is inability to take pleasure in life. So number of problems result from those. Acetylcholine is a excitatory or stimulating neurotransmitter in the brain that tends to be energizing and help you focus and so on. So when you deplete acetylcholine, basically it means less energy, less alertness and ability to focus and concentrate, poorer cognitive performance, and so on. And the way that this works is that chronic stress actually stimulates the activity of the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine, called acetylcholinesterase. And by increasing the activity of that enzyme, you break down more of the acetylcholine that's there and prevent it from actually interacting with the brain cells and doing what acetylcholine does. So basically, less acetylcholine means less energy. Number 3, GABA. GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, and by lowering the brain's sensitivity to it, that's what chronic stress does. It induces GABA resistance. Basically, that prevents the brain from efficiently going into relaxation and rejuvenation mode. GABA is really important in helping to trigger sleep and relaxation at night. So when you have GABA resistance as a result of chronic stress, you'll feel more stimulated. You'll have things like racing thoughts, more fears, anxiety, tension, and obviously poorer sleep. Number 4, stress makes you stupid. It quite literally lowers your intelligence and your ability to use your higher brain centers. So it can lead to poor decision making in almost every area of our lives, from work to relationships to making good choices in the context of lifestyle habits that support good health. For example, whether to go to the gym or whether to eat a nutritious meal or McDonald's, or whether to meditate or mindlessly browse social media. So making good decisions or bad decisions. Where another one might be whether to go home to your abusive partner that you're in a relationship with, or whether to break it off and pursue other things. Number 5, stress decreases thyroid hormones. Low levels of thyroid hormones, if you look up the symptoms of hypothyroidism, for example, you'll see all sorts of things like fatigue, fat gain, anxiety, muscle weakness, chronic pain, depression, hair loss. All sorts of problems result from low thyroid hormones. These are the hormones that are the primary regulators of our metabolism. So everything in the body suffers when you have low thyroid hormones. And chronic stress basically sort of mimics, or it can mimic, the effects of hypothyroidism. So it can cause a lot of these same problems. Number 6, chronic stress causes chronic inflammation. So inflammation is, kind of gets a bad rap, but it's not all bad. Inflammation is an important natural biological response to many threatening agents, such as microorganisms, parasites, bacteria, fungi, viruses, toxic compounds, and pollutants. It's also part of our body's response to being wounded, infections, and many disease processes. Now, the main purpose it serves is to eliminate dead and damaged cells, which is a critical process to repair those tissues back to normal. Inflammation is a very important and beneficial thing in our bodies. Indeed, we could not live without it. Now, having said all that, chronic inflammation is another story altogether. In normal, healthy circumstances, the inflammation response happens rapidly and then goes away when no longer needed, after a few hours or a few days. When it doesn't go away, that's when things get bad. You get mood problems, fatigue, fat gain, weird symptoms popping up, and chronic stress is a major cause of chronic inflammation. And new research has basically found that while cortisol is normally kind of an anti-inflammatory hormone, when a person is in chronic stress and they're chronically producing lots of cortisol, the system becomes kind of desensitized to it. The immune cells stop hearing the signal from cortisol to shut down inflammation. And basically, when you disrupt the signaling of that, when the cells can no longer hear the signal to shut down inflammation, you get chronic inflammation, uncontrolled inflammation that the body can't shut down. And as a result of that, all sorts of problems emerge, and fatigue and dozens of diseases have now been linked to chronic inflammation. Number 7, chronic stress suppresses your immune system. Now, while many people think that whenever they get sick, it's because they caught something from someone else, some new bug that's going around, that's actually not the case most of the time. Our bodies are actually full of all sorts of potentially disease-causing germs pretty much all the time. And in other words, the bugs are already inside of us. Now, when we are healthy and our immune system is functioning well, it keeps these bugs at bay. But when our immunity is weakened, our bodies become susceptible to the invaders taking hold. So one of the big problems with chronic stress is, of course, that it weakens your immunity, so it makes you susceptible to all kinds of infections. Now, worth pointing out that infections of various kinds, viral infections in particular, have been linked with numerous different kinds of fatiguing illness, including chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. So researchers believe that viral infections and chronic viral infections are a big trigger of why people get into chronic fatigue. Number 8, stress causes depression. So there's a number of different mechanisms that stress can wreck your mood. Things like CRH and dynorphin are linked with causing depression, HPA activation and dysfunction, which we already talked about, neurotransmitter resistance and imbalances in the brain, decreases brain-derived neurotrophic factor and impairs neurogenesis. So by doing that, it impairs the generation of new brain cells, and that's implicated as being part of what causes depression, basically. Now, it also causes certain important energy regulating areas of the brain to atrophy. And all of these different mechanisms have been linked to depression. By the way, if somebody wants the research on any of this, I have all the research in the article, which is linked to below this video. So if you want to check that out, feel free to go look at the scientific studies and have fun exploring the research yourself. Number 9, chronic stress can cause chronic physical pain. So this is an interesting one. Pain response in a healthy body basically proceeds like this. So pain signals from the body travel through nerves to the spinal cord and then up to the brain. The brain then processes this information and we get the sensation of pain. Okay, that's kind of normal situation. Now, in a chronically stressed body, the brain begins to process these pain sensations with greater and greater sensitivity. So less of an actual stimulus, of a sensation, is needed to induce pain. In severe chronic stress and pain that's gone on for years, this can get so severe that a person will feel even a light caressing touch as a very sharp, intense pain. Now, this doesn't happen because the touch was actually harming their body, but because their nervous system and brain have been rewired into being so oversensitive that every sensation is now felt as pain. And this is a process called central sensitization. And it's obviously implicated in things like fibromyalgia, where somebody has chronic pain and tender points in their body. And chronic stress is a contributing factor to sensitizing the nervous system to pain stimuli, or I should say sensitizing the nervous system to sensory input and making even gentle sensory input and gentle touch feel painful. So it forms a vicious circle in this sense because the pain itself is now contributing to more stress because it obviously puts you into a stressful state if you are feeling the sensation of pain. So you can see how it creates a vicious cycle here where chronic stress is leading to chronic pain, and then the pain itself is contributing to more stress. Number 10, stress makes you hungry and crave sugar. So going for soda, donuts, candy, or cookies is obviously a recipe for terrible energy levels. So if you follow those sugar cravings and actually, go with those cravings and kind of eat what your body's telling you to do, you're going to make decisions as far as what to put in your body that result in bad energy levels. Now, the main reason why this happens is a neurotransmitter in the brain called orexin, which is the single most important neurotransmitter when it comes to wakefulness and energy levels. And the basic idea is high orexin levels leads to high energy, low orexin leads to low energy. Now, the problem with poor food choices is that they will directly impact on orexin for several reasons. So first of all, large glycemic loads, sugar loads in the body, will directly suppress orexin levels. So while you will feel an initial boost of energy, it's actually damaging your energy if you analyze things on just a little longer time frame. It's certainly damaging that within a period of several hours, and it's even much more damaging over the course of days and weeks and months and years of doing those, of eating that way. Low fiber and low protein content in meals. So if you eat processed food that's really rich in carbs and fats, sugar and fat, or flour and fat, and doesn't have a lot of fiber, like from unrefined plant foods, doesn't have a lot of good protein content, that too will balance your orexin response to that meal, will unbalance your orexin response. And as a result, you're going to have bad energy levels after that meal. It also tends to increase inflammation, and inflammation is another factor that will lower your orexin levels and crush your energy levels. So now combine the fact that you have sugar cravings with stress. Combine that with what we talked about before, with the fact that chronic stress actually shuts down some of the higher thinking, higher thought centers of the brain, and it becomes even easier to make very poor decisions around what you're putting into your body. Number 11, stress lowers many beneficial hormones, so things like pregnenolone, DHEA, testosterone, and growth hormone. Pregnenolone is a precursor hormone that can be used to make both stress hormones and sex hormones. That's a really, really important point, so remember that. Now, whether it makes more stress hormones or sex hormones is largely dependent on the signals it's getting from the environment. Basically, the body's asking, is the primary objective for us, for the cells and organs of your body, to procreate? Are we in a relaxed state where, we can have fun and relax and, have sex, or run for your life? Stress mode, fight or flight mode. So there's a sort of trade-off here. The more you place a demand on your body to make stress hormones, the less of the anti-aging, energy-enhancing hormones that you make. In a way, it's stealing the pregnenolone away from being used to make sex hormones like testosterone and progesterone. So all these different kind of youth hormones, mood and energy enhancing hormones like testosterone, pregnenolone, progesterone, DHEA, they all take a hit when you're chronically stressed. So you're likely to be more inflamed, in a poorer mood, performing worse with higher stress and anxiety levels, and have lower energy levels. Number 12, and this is a really important one, chronic stress damages our mitochondria. So you've probably heard of free radicals and antioxidants before. The notion that antioxidants are good because they prevent free radicals from damaging your cells. It turns out that the common notion of antioxidants as good and free radicals as bad is actually horribly inaccurate. Now, we don't have time to get into all of the science around that. This is something that I've gone into in some of my other articles and videos more in depth. But the reality is we have an internal antioxidant defense system inside of our cells. And as long as the free radicals don't overwhelm our body's capacity to handle them, they're not harmful in any way. So, in other words, if we have a level of free radicals that are being produced, that those free radicals can be quenched by our internal antioxidant defense system, those free radicals are not harmful. In fact, new research has basically shown that free radicals are important signaling molecules in our body. And if you quench them, for example, if you take antioxidants around a period of exercise, and exercise is actually something that produces free radicals. If you take vitamin C or vitamin E pills around your workouts, you will actually inhibit your body's ability to adapt to the workout. So basically, to kind of flip your paradigm around free radicals and antioxidants around for you, research has now shown that free radicals are not always harmful, and in small or moderate amounts, they're actually important and necessary signaling molecules for our health. And taking too much antioxidants at the wrong time can actually be damaging to your body. Now, if you're interested in exploring the research on that, it's a concept called hormesis or mitohormesis, and Michael Risto has done a lot of pioneering research around that. He's a German MD and PhD, and he's done numerous studies over the last decade on that subject. But just to add a further emphasis on this, if you think free radicals are harmful and we need antioxidants all the time, just consider the fact that exercise actually produces free radicals. So why would exercise be harmful or be beneficial to our health, I should say, if it's producing these really damaging things called free radicals? Well, like I said, it's actually part of what makes exercise healthful and beneficial to us is the fact that it produces free radicals that stimulate our internal antioxidant defense system and make it grow stronger and create all sorts of beneficial adaptations in our body. So in that sense, the big problem here is not that all psychological stress is bad for you. Much like exercise, in small doses happening occasionally and then going away, psychological stress can actually be a good thing. It can make you tougher, more courageous, mentally stronger, and can stimulate you to grow as a person in pretty much every way imaginable. Now, if you think about it, if you had no stress and no demands on you, you would never grow, you would never feel challenged, you would never feel a sense of accomplishment or meaning or purpose in your life. So it's important just to point out that a certain amount, small or moderate amount of psychological stress for certain periods of time that then goes away is actually really important for our overall health, meaning in life, happiness, all of those things, in much the same way as exercise. So exercise is really beneficial to you if you do it in small or moderate amounts and then stop doing it. But if you were to run a marathon, for example, all day, every day, it would then become a very toxic pathological stressor that would break down your body very, very fast. So basically, the dose makes the poison. That's a common saying within medicine. The dose makes the poison, and it's very true here. So the big problem is when psychological stress becomes chronic and it doesn't go away, it's there all the time, that's when it wreaks havoc on the body. It'll overwhelm the body's internal antioxidant defense system and will result in uncontrolled oxidative stress, oxidative damage, in particular on your mitochondria. So chronic uncontrolled oxidative stress causes a number of problems, can dysregulate the HPA axis, it can cause inflammation, but the big one here is that it will cause direct damage to your mitochondria. And your mitochondria are the cellular energy generators in your cells. So when those get damaged, and when they even die off, if they get too much damage, they'll actually die off, not just stay there and be dysfunctional. So you're creating two problems with mitochondria. One is that you're damaging them and causing them to be less powerful at generating energy for your body. And the other one is that you're actually killing them off in many cases. So you have less mitochondria as a result of this. And that's one of the effects of chronic stress. And so by damaging and killing off a lot of your mitochondria, of course, you have a smaller cellular engine in your body, and your body is not as efficient and as powerful at actually creating energy. On that note, there's a really interesting study that I talk about in the article that accompanies this video, where they compared a group of women who were on a junk food diet, and one of the groups basically was on a junk food diet while not being psychologically stressed. And the other group was on the same exact diet, but they were also under chronic psychological stress. And what they found is that the women who were chronically stressed had double the level of oxidative stress, oxidative damage going on in their bodies compared to those who ate a junk food diet and were not stressed. So really cool, interesting study basically showing that the effects of the damage from eating a poor diet and psychological stress actually combine and further kind of amplify the damage that's being done. Number 13, stress disrupts your circadian rhythm and sleep. Now, for those that don't know, circadian rhythm is the 24-hour biological clock in your brain that regulates your sleep and wake cycles. So if that sounds like kind of an abstract idea to you and kind of out there, just consider the fact that you experience the effects of your circadian rhythm every day. This is what causes you to wake up in the morning. It's what causes you to feel tired and sleepy at night. And it turns out that this system in the brain, it's an area called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Not important that you remember that, but basically it's the specific part of your brain, and it really works like a 24-hour clock. And the problem is that the modern world, with artificial light and electronics and the fact that we live very indoor lives and we don't spend a lot of time outside, it tends to disrupt our circadian rhythm and throw off the biological clock, and basically puts us into a chronic low-level jet lag pretty much all the time. So you've all experienced the effects of jet lag when you travel to a new time zone. Well, what most people don't realize is they're actually experiencing those effects pretty much all the time on a subtle level. And it's just their normal state, so they don't even realize that they're experiencing it. So disrupted circadian rhythm can result in basically all of the symptoms that are associated with adrenal fatigue: anxiety, depression, fatigue, daytime sleepiness, poor ability to sleep, insomnia, sugar cravings, lower resiliency in the face of stress, on and on and on. Basically all of the symptoms that are associated with, adrenal fatigue, quote unquote, which is, all of these symptoms are being blamed on your adrenals, not being able to keep up with stress demands. All of these things can actually be induced just through disrupting a person's circadian rhythm. Now, stress also impacts directly on sleep through several different mechanisms. So first of all, it prolongs sleep onset, which is the time it takes your body to actually fall asleep once you're laying in bed. And basically, as a result of that, it means that, let's say if you spend 8 or 9 hours in bed every night, well, less of those hours that you're actually in bed trying to sleep are hours that you're actually sleeping. So, and essentially what it can do is cause low-level sleep deprivation. And, that's another factor that can result in a lot of those symptoms of adrenal fatigue. It can also impact the emotional states that you experience during sleep and dreaming, and can cause nightmares. So you've all probably felt the effects on your sleep of being stressed out. When you're stressed, your sleep is disturbed and you're having certain thoughts during your sleep, and, maybe you have nightmares during your sleep. It impacts the kinds of emotional experiences and the emotional state your body is in during those hours of sleep. And of course, if you're having racing thoughts and you're having nightmares during the time you're supposed to be sleeping and rejuvenating your body, that's going to greatly impact your body's ability to rejuvenate. It's really, really important to be in a good emotional state in order for your body to actually regenerate and rejuvenate itself each night. It also greatly decreases the amount of slow wave sleep. And this kind of goes along with the previous point. Slow wave sleep is the really restful and regenerative type of sleep. And by being stressed out, you will reduce your body's ability to actually get into that regenerative type of sleep. And it's worth mentioning that loss of sleep is often regarded as the mother of all health issues. So, this is a big problem. If you're stressed out and your sleep is disturbed as a result of it, it can cause all sorts of problems. Number 14, stress causes a leaky brain barrier. So, turns out that we actually have a sort of filter, kind of like a barrier around our brain. And this barrier around our brain is basically designed to dictate what substances floating around in the bloodstream are able to get into the brain, and what substances are designed to stay out, or what substances should stay out of the brain. Now, when you start to create leakiness in the brain as a result of chronic stress basically stimulating, causing the release of histamine and certain inflammatory compounds, it kind of breaks down this brain barrier. And then substances which shouldn't be getting into the brain start to get in. And that further leads to chronic inflammation in the brain, and that can wreak all sorts of havoc on all sorts of areas of the brain that regulate health and energy levels. Number 15, stress flushes out beneficial minerals from your body, in particular, potassium and magnesium. And you can see some of the functions of potassium here. It's really, really important mineral. And magnesium, most health-conscious people are aware of how important magnesium is. It's involved in all sorts of metabolic processes, including in cellular energy production. So it's easy to see if you're magnesium deficient, you're probably going to be energy deficient. And number 16, stress harms your gut. And this is a big one. So stress can actually directly induce leaky gut. Gut permeability is the more scientific accepted term for that. And, there's a lot of discussion around leaky gut and, certain foods or food additives and things that might contribute to leaky gut. And while there's a lot of truth in a lot of these different mechanisms, the reality is that chronic psychological and emotional stress can actually directly induce gut permeability. Just through the increase of those hormones, of cortisol in particular, it can induce leaky gut. And leaky gut now comes with a whole bunch of problems. So number one, and this is probably the biggest one, it increases the amount of bacterial toxins that are leaking into your bloodstream. So normally, if you have a strong gut barrier, those toxins will be kept in the intestines and will end up in the toilet for the most part. But if you have leaky gut, if you have too much gut permeability, a lot of these toxins start to be leaking into your bloodstream chronically. And this particular type of bacterial toxin called endotoxin is linked with all sorts of nasty effects. It's linked with numerous different diseases. It's linked with heart disease. It's linked with various cancers. It's linked with fatigue. It's linked with obesity and fat gain. So all sorts of problems can result of that. Also, by inducing gut permeability, it can create food sensitivities and intolerances, irritable bowel syndrome, decreased flow in the small intestines, which can lead to overgrowth of harmful bacterial species. And that kind of goes along with the first point about endotoxin, because when you get lots of harmful bacterial species, they actually produce more of that toxin, endotoxin. And so as a result, now you're combining more toxin producing bacteria with more gut permeability, and it creates all sorts of problems. Gut pain and increased sensitivity to gut pain, meaning you'll be more aware and sensitive to the different pains that you're experiencing down there. It can also directly induce low cortisol levels. So we don't need to invoke any theories of the adrenals getting fatigued. Just by having more endotoxin in the system, you'll have lower cortisol levels, and the body basically will intentionally shut down or lower cortisol levels in an effort to create more inflammation to deal with the toxin. So cortisol and inflammation exist on kind of a teeter-totter, and if the body senses more need for inflammation to combat, for example, a toxin, it will actually intentionally lower cortisol. And it's not because the adrenal glands are getting fatigued, it's because the body wants lower cortisol levels to fight the inflammation. And that's kind of a little hint, by the way, as to why a lot of low cortisol issues are actually not from adrenal fatigue. They're from the body trying to deal with chronic inflammation or chronic infections and actually intentionally lowering cortisol levels to better deal with those situations. Also, the inflammation caused by gut leakiness directly shuts down that neurotransmitter I mentioned before called orexin, which causes fatigue and a sense of lack of energy. So those are the 16 mechanisms that cause stress to wreck our energy levels. So hopefully you can see that this is a lot more complex than just saying, stress wears our adrenal glands down and they can't produce enough cortisol, and that's what causes all these symptoms. I hope that you get now that this is way more complex than that, and there's lots of physiological mechanisms in the body that are causing fatigue that have nothing to do with fatiguing our adrenal glands. So now that we've talked about all these different physiological mechanisms, let's get into how to actually break free of chronic stress. There's 5 steps that I want to talk to you about in order to do that. Number 1 is minimize or eliminate your stimulant use, at least temporarily. So things like caffeine, nicotine, a lot of different stimulants, Adderall, basically all the different stimulants are going to activate those stress response pathways in the brain, as well as the HPA axis. And if you already have an overactive, overstressed system, as far as that stress response system, doing stimulants, while it's going to give you that initial burst of energy, is just going to make you worse in the long run. It's just creating more demand on that system. Now, there's a video I did on the subject of coffee and the science of caffeine and how it actually works in our brains and our bodies, and how it actually damages our mood and energy and performance when it's used in the way most people use it. And I'll give you a link to that video so you can go check that out. So you start using caffeine and coffee in the right way instead of a way that is going to damage your mood and energy and performance in the long run. But basically, chronic use of stimulants is counterproductive in terms of your energy levels. For one, it stimulates the stress response pathways of the body. So if you're already stressed and you have an overactive stress response system, it's just going to stimulate those systems even more, as I mentioned. And also, it can create too much of a release of stimulating neurotransmitters in the brain, which eventually leads to neurotransmitter resistance and imbalances of several neurotransmitter systems in the brain. And again, I go into that in detail in the other video on coffee. So I definitely recommend checking that out. But to summarize this, if you're currently a coffee addict, your goal is to slowly and progressively wean yourself off of it over the next 4 to 8 weeks. And then you'll want to take a break for 3 to 6 weeks, completely off of all sources of caffeine. And what you're going to do by doing that is allow all this chronic overstimulation of your brain to go away, and you're going to allow a lot of these neurotransmitter systems in the brain to reset themselves and get back to normal and stop feeling like they need to combat being chronically overstimulated. So a quick note on that subject is decaf is your friend. If you want to minimize symptoms, negative symptoms, use decaf, wean yourself off slowly. Don't go cold turkey in terms of going off caffeine, because if you're currently addicted to caffeine or dependent on caffeine, if you go cold turkey off of it, you're pretty much guaranteed to experience drug withdrawal symptoms of caffeine, like headaches and fatigue and all sorts of issues. Number 2, lower your sensory load, which is how much stimulation you're giving your senses throughout the day. Now, most of us are living in a world where we're constantly bombarded with sensory stimulation. You know, we have computers and tablets and phones and email and people trying to talk to us and sounds coming at us, and we're listening to music, and you know, we have all these different sources constantly fighting for our attention, and all these different visual stimuli and auditory stimuli coming at us all day long. And that wears our system out. It is actually demanding on our brains and attention systems of the brain to have to deal with all of these competing stimuli and try to make sense of all of this stuff. And if you think about this in an evolutionary context, this is a radically different world than the world that our ancestors existed in, which had no electronics, for example. And was really a much less stimulating world. Now, to cope with this modern stimulating world, the brain is basically constantly trying to find a way to calm itself down through the release of various inhibitory neurotransmitters. The problem is the system eventually wears out, and it just can't keep doing this day after day after day. So naturally, if you're in this overly stimulating world and you want to start to fix the situation and de-stress your brain, start to become aware of this. That's the first thing. So are you always on the go doing things without taking breaks to recharge? Well, if you are, start implementing breaks where you just give yourself a few minutes to close your eyes and to not have any of the stimulation going on around you. Don't be looking at your phone constantly, checking every email and every text, and responding to every buzz and beep and ding that you get on any of your electronic devices. Listening to loud, aggressive music while driving or exercising, that's another one that can be very stimulating. Getting involved in exciting, fast-moving or violent movies or video games before going to bed is another big one. It's especially bad when you're doing it right before bed. Staring at a computer monitor for most of your workday. Most people don't realize it, but computer monitors actually flicker. They just do it so fast that we can't detect it with our naked eye. And that flicker is actually another source of eye strain on the visual and on the visual processing centers of the brain that eventually leads to draining your energy. Now, this is why they have now invented flicker-free computer monitors, and I highly recommend getting one if you spend a lot of time on your computer each day. I have a link to recommendations for that in the article. But I have a flicker-free monitor, and it makes a huge difference in not only energy levels, but in terms of eye strain throughout the day. You just feel much less tense and much better energy while still being able to work at your computer. Staring at the TV for hours. Also, if you're combining things, like you're watching TV while also you're having a phone in your hand and trying to text people while also having the stimulation of the TV, and all those things, listening to overly stimulating background music or listening to music with lyrics while you're trying to work. Being indoors under artificial light for most of the day without any natural light source. Fluorescent lights also flicker, which causes eye strain and tends to drain your energy. Things which cause chronic strain in general tend to drain your energy. So become aware of it if you're doing any of those things, and start to get rid of that, chronic overstimulation where you have multiple levels of stimulation coming at you at the same time. And just try to be aware of your overall sensory load and spend some time in quiet. There's actually recent research showing that just spending a little bit of time in silence can actually have profound effects on the brain, beneficial effects on the brain. So just make a little bit of time to separate yourself from the constant stimulation. And you can have a block of time that you do that during the day. For example, meditation or yoga might be an example of that. Or I'd also recommend doing it every half an hour or every hour. So one good strategy is to use a mindfulness bell that goes off every half an hour or every hour throughout the day, and just gives you a moment to pause and release all the racing thoughts and all the stuff you've been working on, and just take a deep breath and relax and lower your sensory load, reset your sensory systems, and then go back to work. And little things like that just take 30 seconds every hour make a big difference at the end of the day. Number 3, optimize your circadian rhythm and sleep. So we talked about that being a big factor in how chronic stress damages your energy levels. So some strategies to actually get this implemented. One is wear blue blocker glasses at least 1 hour before bed, but preferably 2 to 3 hours. And the ones that I recommend are the Uvex brand. It's UVEX. And again, I have a link to everything I'm recommending. I'll have a link to in the article. So if you just click the link below, you'll get that. And you can also get some more stylish ones like blue blockers, or the Swanwick blue blocking glasses. The problem with those is they still allow light in on the sides, so they're not as ideal as the Uvex glasses, but they look cooler. Download Flux or Twilight apps on your computer, tablet, and phone. The new iPhones have a night shift mode, where they will lower your blue light emission at night. If you have Android, you'll want to get an app called Twilight. It's a free app, and that will decrease the amount of blue light that your phone emits in the evenings, which will help keep your circadian rhythm intact. And then Flux is the same type of technology that can be downloaded on your computer. So definitely recommend using all those. Finally, one of the best strategies is to get incandescent or red or amber colored bulbs for just a few lamps in your house in the areas that you spend time in at night, as well as your bedroom and bathroom. And that way you don't have to rely on wearing those blue blocker glasses because you have now basically changed your environment to have more natural lighting conditions that don't disrupt your circadian rhythm. So after sunset, only use those light sources. You want dim light, and it should be orange or red or amber colored light, and that won't disrupt your circadian rhythm. Now, if you don't do any of this stuff, if you don't wear blue blocker glasses and you are, looking at electronic screens under bright indoor, fluorescent or LED lights, you are living with a chronically disrupted circadian rhythm. And you're not only predisposing to diseases and shaving years off your life, but you're living with a chronically poorer mood and energy levels. So you're actually damaging the quality of your life very significantly by doing that. Number 4, build recharge rituals into your life. Learning to operate your brain optimally, to not be in stress mode all the time, centers around building recharge rituals into your life. Now, what are recharge rituals? Well, they're predetermined periods of the day where you engage in consciously cultivating the kinds of brain performance habits that you want. Basically, you can't expect your brain to be good at relaxation, happiness, being in a state of high energy, focus, laughter, play, gratitude, if you aren't consciously building those brain pathways. Or worse, if you're unconsciously building the opposite brain pathways, as most people are. So if your daily practice is running around like a chicken with your head cut off, always running from one thing to the next, getting distracted with every email and text on your phone, using caffeine to get yourself going, feeling stressed and irritated, then guess what your brain will eventually learn to get good at? Yep, being in stress mode. We become what we practice. Now, building recharge rituals into your life is the way out of that mess. Now, there's 3 critical times that you want to do this. The morning ritual, nighttime ritual, and then brief recharge rituals interspersed throughout the day, ideally for 1 to 5 minutes every hour. And one example of that is just what I mentioned with the mindfulness bell going off every half an hour, every hour. Just even something as simple as closing your eyes, just taking a deep breath, and then having the intention to breathe out the stress, let go of all the anxiety, and then, something as simple as breathing in peace and breathing out stress, or whatever, your value system, and you want to make those words or those phrases something that you connect with. It can be an opportunity to reconnect with, any spiritual beliefs you have, or anything of that nature. Just reconnect with your value systems, reconnect with relaxation and letting go of the stress and anxiety. That's as simple as a recharge ritual can be. Morning ritual, nighttime ritual, why these 3 times? Why the nighttime and morning ritual in particular? Well, it's because the bookends of the day are really important for training your brain how to behave. And there's no real hard science on this, but most people have probably experienced this, that when you're going to bed stressed and tense and anxious and fearful, it impacts what you think about over those next 8 hours that you're sleeping, and might even predispose to nightmares and things like that. On the other hand, if you're going to bed in a really beautiful emotional state, you're probably not going to have nightmares. And you're programming your brain for what to experience during those next 8 hours in a different way, in a more beneficial way. And so, basically the morning and nighttime periods are areas where we seem to have a lot of control over kind of priming the pump, priming the brain for what it's going to experience over the next several hours. And so those are really good times to consciously cultivate positive emotional experiences and gratitude and thankfulness, and reconnect with your value systems or your spirituality, or whatever's meaningful to you in your life, and give thanks and just consciously cultivate a state of serenity and happiness. So things like meditation, mindfulness, good social relationships, laughing and playing with friends, or talking on the phone with somebody you care about, laughter, prayer, breathing exercises, singing and chanting exercises, dancing, music and sound therapy, yoga, exercise, massages, all of these are good examples of potential recharge rituals. Number 5, rebuild your endocannabinoid system. So the first of those habits that I went over was about the endocannabinoid system, and we talked about how it's involved with combating fear and anxiety and stress, and how when it gets depleted, your body has a really hard time turning off stress mode. And it kind of creates this, it kind of locks you into chronic stress mode, and the body can't get out. So rebuilding and balancing your endocannabinoid system is critical to getting your body out of chronic stress mode. So 5 quick strategies that I want to give you to do that. Number 1 is de-stress. all of those things I just mentioned, all of the previous 4 strategies for de-stressing, will all help rebuild the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is drained by being stressed. So the first step that you have to do to rebuild that system is you have to lower the overall stress load on your body and start to put in some good de-stressing strategies, and especially those recharge rituals into your life. Really, really critical. Number 2, greens. Greens have a substance called beta-caryophyllene, and it is what's called a dietary phytocannabinoid, and it helps to balance and rebuild your endocannabinoid system. So eat lots of greens. If you are currently not eating very much greens, as most people do, then think about doubling, tripling, or quadrupling your greens intake, and think about trying to get greens in every meal that you eat. And that will be a good starting point for getting some more dietary phytocannabinoids, and a really strong one, beta-caryophyllene, in your system. Number 3, cut alcohol consumption. Alcohol is a must-avoid compound when trying to rebuild your endocannabinoid system, because it basically counteracts all the things we're trying to do with balancing out the endocannabinoid system. Number 4, massage, acupressure mats, or acupuncture, and self-myofascial release. There's research basically showing that all of those have positive effects on the endocannabinoid system. So, obviously, most people can't afford to get professional massages or acupuncture several times a week or daily. So what you can do is use acupressure mats, which you can do at home for free once you've done the one-time purchase of buying one of these little mats. Or you can do self-myofascial release by rolling your back on tennis balls or lacrosse balls, or using a foam roller and things like that. All of those will have beneficial effects on the endocannabinoid system. And then the last one is CBD, which stands for cannabidiol. And it's really kind of all the rage these days. There's a lot of research that's come out over the last few years on this, and it's become very popular. And a lot of this research is showing that CBD is effective in combating not just stress and anxiety, but pain and all sorts of different conditions. There's even research on it related to cancer and things like that. And CBD is another compound that you can consume that has very, very powerful and beneficial effects on the endocannabinoid system. So it really helps balance out the system. And without getting into too many details of all the receptors, and you can get really deep in terms of CB1 and CB2 and all this sort of stuff. But basically, CBD has very beneficial effects in combating stress and anxiety and tension and fear and all of those things, and helping to balance out and rebuild the cannabinoid system. Now, also on that note, I have recommendations on where to get it and the specific products that I recommend. The company that I recommend is called Bluebird Botanicals. And if you go to the article, I have specific links to which ones of their products that I would recommend. But Bluebird Botanicals has been rated just this last year the #1 provider of CBD. There's a lot of low quality ones on the market, so I definitely recommend getting a very high quality one and making sure you're going through a reputable company. So to recap, the way that stress interacts with our health and energy levels goes way beyond our adrenal glands. It's not just about adrenal fatigue. That's not where all these symptoms are coming from, just from wearing out our adrenal glands. As you saw, there's 16 mechanisms, and there's probably more than that. There's at least 16 mechanisms that impact our energy levels and our fatigue as a result of chronic stress that really have nothing to do with the adrenal glands, or most of them have very little to do with the adrenal glands. De-stress and regenerate your body using the 5 strategies outlined here. That's the key point. After, we talked about all these different mechanisms, but actually use and implement these strategies that I just went over. Finally, go to theenergyblueprint.com and sign up for our free video training series on how to double your energy. There's tons more powerful strategies in that video series. So if you enjoyed what you got here, go to that website, sign up, and start getting lots more powerful strategies to benefit your energy levels.